to other tools we use, it's easier to appreciate how it has transformed us and our environment. Consider Archimedes' three simple machines: the lever, the pulley, and the screw. In the 3rd century BC, Archimedes explained that these human inventions were force multipliers, meaning that the mechanical advantage they afforded could transform small physical forces into much larger ones. With regard to the lever, Archimedes famously said, "Give me a place to stand on, and I will move the earth." No doubt these simple machines transformed not only how humans influenced our world, but also how we thought of it too. Now, if you view language as the tool that makes all other tools, it's the ultimate force multiplier. Just by vibrating our vocal cords or making marks on a page, humans can coordinate actions that help build and use these simple machines. Not to mention that language is necessary for explaining how these machines work. This explanatory function should not be minimized. Without the explanatory power of language, it's not possible to keep building more and more sophisticated machines. You need language to go from levers, pulleys, and screws to telescopes, computers, and satellites. And I'll go one step further in this course. I'll argue that without language, the human mind cannot even conceive of creating other tools in the first place. From this perspective, language actually transforms the mind to allow it to do things it couldn't do without language. Even if you're not quite ready to go this far yet, I hope it's clear that language is an extremely powerful tool of the mind. In the spirit of viewing language as a tool, I'd like to introduce a conceptual framework. I'll call it the 3D framework. This framework will organize and analyze the issues we will discuss in this course. The framework has 3 dimensions, and each one is necessary to understand something as complex as language and the mind. The 3 dimensions are causation, levels of analysis, and time frame. To flesh out the framework, I'll return to an example from earlier. Let's suppose we want to understand the relationship between writing and the mind. The first dimension of the framework is causation, and it concerns 2 things. What causes a thing, and what does the thing cause? This distinction is inspired by Aristotle's efficient cause and final cause. In more modern times, the Nobel Prize-winning biologist Nicholas Tinbergen referred to these 2 types of causes as mechanisms and functions. With writing, a mechanism would be the antecedent conditions that produce the behavior of writing. For example, these might include activation of brain regions dedicated to your native language, a desire to express yourself, or a social injustice that compels you to put pen to paper. In contrast, the function is the consequence of writing. For example, these might include clearing up confusion, convincing people of an argument, or making your feelings public. So for every behavior, there are things that produce it, mechanisms, and things it produces, functions. Okay, so far so good. Let's add the second dimension, levels of analysis. This distinction comes back to the concept of reductionism and emergent properties. Recall that emergentism rejects the idea that all behaviors can be reduced to the lowest levels of analysis, like neurons, genes, or particles. Instead, it embraces the idea that all levels of analysis may be useful in explaining a behavior. That's the approach we'll adopt here. In the 3D framework, there are 3 levels of analysis: biological, psychological, and social. The biological level focuses on small things like neurons firing and genes expressing, but also larger scale biological activity, like brain regions communicating and turning thoughts into actions. And the psychological level concerns subjective experiences like feeling, thinking, and perceiving. And the social level concerns how an organism interacts with things that are outside of the body, which includes not just humans, but objects too. Let's take our writing example, and then let's focus on identifying mechanisms for writing on our 3 levels of analysis. We'll ignore function for now. Each one of the mechanisms I mentioned earlier operates on a different level of analysis. The biological level concerns brain regions that are dedicated to your native language. The psychological level concerns your desire to express yourself, and the social level concerns the societal conditions that compel you to write. Can you appreciate how each of those mechanisms is useful for understanding what causes someone to write? Of course, it all depends on what you're trying to explain. Now, if you want to understand what caused Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels to write the Communist Manifesto, it would be odd, very odd, to focus only on how the motor cortex allowed them to put letters on a piece of paper. In contrast, if you were a doctor treating a patient who hit his head and suddenly lost the ability to write, it would be a poor use of time to consider the political motivations or events that inspire that patient to write. But as a rule of thumb, it's best to take all levels seriously when trying to understand highly complex behaviors. You may be surprised to learn that the prolific novelist Stephen King occasionally suffers from writer's block. It's true. In his book entitled On Writing, King describes a bad case of writer's block he had back in college. Now, if we wanted to fully understand what caused this particular episode, we'd want to use our full arsenal of levels of analysis to uncover the mechanism. Biologically, maybe King wasn't sleeping well, and that made it hard for his frontal cortex to concentrate. Psychologically, maybe he was feeling insecure at this early stage of his career, and maybe he didn't think his work was worth anything, it wasn't any good. And socially, perhaps he just broke up with his girlfriend and lost his muse. And who knows, maybe it was a combination of all three of these things. The point is that the only way to thoroughly understand what causes a behavior is to consider potential mechanisms on all levels of analysis and how they interact. Okay, the final dimension of the 3D framework is time frame, or the scale on which you want to understand the cause and effect of something. It may help to think of this as a timeline from short to long. It spans from the very, very brief, 1 millisecond to the next, to quite a bit longer, 1 day, week, or year to the next, to longer still, 1 generation to the next. You can even go much bigger than that, 1 century, millennium, or evolutionary eon to the next. We'll refer to these different points on the timeline as the moment-to-moment, developmental, historical, and evolutionary time frames. As you'll see, approaching a subject from these different time frames fundamentally changes how you think about it. Let's return to our example of writing and explore how different mechanisms for writing operate on different time frames. Starting with the smallest time frame, the moment-to-moment, we can describe the immediate antecedents to putting pen to paper. Neurons firing to link ideas into words, a flash of inspiration that bubbles up from your unconscious. Or maybe you just saw something that gave you an idea. These can all contribute to that wonderful aha moment in writing. Now let's pull back a bit. Let's pull back to the developmental time frame. Things are different on this scale. Here we talk about much slower mechanisms, such as how a lifetime of using language has wired your brain to think in words, or a personality trait that compels you to write, or years of reading books that have allowed you to hone your writing skills. These things do not happen overnight. They are an accumulated context that provides a foundation for the moment-to-moment mechanisms. Let's pull back further still. On the historical time frame, you need to consider the larger context in which a behavior occurs. This context involves really big things like cultural institutions, national identity, and technological innovations. Imagine what the Library of Alexandria did for writing in ancient Egypt. Or consider how the free speech laws of a country influence what's safe and unsafe to write. What about inventions like the printing press, or typewriters, or Twitter? These major historical developments serve as a broader context for the smaller time frames. In order to fully understand what causes someone to write, you must consider this historical time frame. Take the historical context of the mid-19th century. At the time, capitalism dominated political ideology in the West. It was also a time of intense class struggles between the wealthy and the poor. It's only within that historical context that you can understand what inspired Marx and Engels to write the Communist Manifesto. Finally, we can pull back even further to the evolutionary time frame. This is the big one. Here we can talk about a time scale of millions of years, a scale that differentiates one species from the next. It's on this time scale where we talk about the unique genetic baggage that different species carry around with them. The mechanisms for writing take on a very different meaning on this time scale. Humans are the only species on the planet that write books, or poems, or even shopping lists. Why are we the only ones able to do this? Well, one key is our unique biological makeup. As you'll soon see, humans have a set of genes and some basic learning abilities that endow us with the capacity to write. In this way, you can say that the ability to write is an innate property of all humans. Now, let's put it all together, as I hope you're starting to see the three dimensions of the framework interact with one another. For example, a mechanism can have 3 levels, and each level can span 4 different time frames. Do you see how this helps you organize complex behaviors in a structured way? Thinking in 3 dimensions also clears up apparent contradictions that might be caused by focusing only on one level or one time frame. To illustrate, let's return to where we left off. I just said that the ability to write was innate to humans. Let's include reading as innate too. So hearing this, you might assume that evolution has created a specialized brain module in humans that is dedicated to reading and writing. Not unlike how evolution has endowed us with a specialized organ for pumping blood, called the heart, or a specialized brain region for regulating our temperature, called the hypothalamus. Isn't it the same for reading and writing? The answer is no, not quite. But isn't that a contradiction? If reading and writing are innate, how can we not be born with a specialized brain mechanism dedicated to them? What's going on here? The 3D framework offers a way out. The only way to solve this puzzle is to consider mechanisms for reading and writing on different time frames and on multiple levels of analysis.